Dreamscape presents Murder in an Irish Pub by Carlene O'Connor. Narrated by Caroline Lennon. Chapter 1. Siobhan O'Sullivan dimmed the lights in Naomi's bistro, tucked falling strands of her auburn locks into her Garda cap, and smoothed down the coat of her uniform as if she was going on a date, instead of reporting for duty. What luck! Getting paid to attend the opening rounds of the International Poker Tournament. The good folks of Kilbane were stunned it was being held in their medieval village. Imagine, Eamon Foley, the best poker player in all of Ireland, just a few doors down in O'Rourke's pub. A traveller out of Dublin, he won so often that people surmised he had 8 hands under the table, earning him the nickname the Octopus. Perhaps the moniker had nothing to do with his mad card skills, and his wandering eyes were to blame. Siobhan wasn't a gambler, but she'd bet his pregnant wife wasn't happy about that. Siobhan stepped out into the fresh spring night, locked the door to the bistro, and flipped on the light above their sign. Naomi's Bistro was carved on a wooden plank, written in black script, and outlined in her favourite colour, robin's egg blue. Looking at it always gave her a rush of pride, that comforting feeling she was home. Like many families who ran businesses in Kilbane, Siobhan and her siblings lived in a flat above the bistro, melting the lines between work and home like a hearty ham and cheese toastie. She stepped onto the footpath and took in the white tents being erected up and down Sarsfield Street. This weekend would deliver a double dose of excitement, coupling the poker tournament with the annual Arts and Music Festival. Starting tomorrow, the place would be alive with paintings and carvings, and Irish dancing, and handmade wares, and musicians staked out on corners, making heads bob and feet tap. There was something so delicious about closing a street to traffic and ambling down it without fear of being mowed over by a lad with a twitchy foot. Twilight was descending, injecting purple and red streaks into the Irish skies. The sound of hooves caught her attention. 16-year-old Amanda Moore was leading her prized racehorse, Midnight, down the street, holding the rope gently, her father striding proudly beside her. Only 2 years old, he'd already won the Cork races, and was favoured to win many more. He was all shiny, black and sinewy muscle. Gorgeous. Siobhan wished she had time to stop and nuzzle the horse, but the games were about to begin. She felt a tad guilty as she passed the tent for Naomi's Bistro, imagining her brother James hard at work, until she spotted him sparring with Kieran, the runt of the O'Sullivan 6 litter. They held their tent poles aloft, thrusting and slicing through the air, locked in a deadly duel. James gave her a nod and a wink, while she resisted the urge to warn them about losing an eye. Just ahead, a line snaked out of O'Rourke's pub, and lads itching to part with their wages clustered around the betting shops. The air was thick with the smell of curried chips and easy money. Piles and piles of money. The winning purse was €250,000. Not to mention all the side bets that were being made. Deals done in the shops, and deals done on the footpath, and deals done in the dark. She shuddered to think of the men who would bet it all, feverish with hope, only to end up losing everything but the shirts on their back. And sometimes they lost that too. If only it was hyperbole. Betting could spike a fever in some men, and those stricken with the worst of it had lost tractors and cars and houses and cattle and eventually wives. Across the way, Sheila Mahoney was puffing on a cigarette outside of her hair salon, platinum blonde hair streaked with green, spyglasses perched over her ample bosom, as if she planned on peering in on the games from a distance. She spotted Siobhan, held up a strand of her hair, and mimicked hacking it off. It had been ages since Siobhan had paid her a visit. She absent-mindedly touched her cap as she stared at Sheila's new black and white sign, "Curl up and die." Siobhan turned her attention to the pub, and her heart sank when she saw the line. There were so many people, they crowded out the front window, sporting Declan's collection of Laurel and Hardy memorabilia. O'Rourke's was an institution in Kilbane, as it well should be. Declan had been serving pints and holding court and hearing confessions longer than Father Kearney. He was as respected as he was feared, which was why his pub was chosen to host the games. If lads got too riled up, one could count on Declan O'Rourke to settle them down. Menace and knacks would not be tolerated, not in his pub. Garda or not, this crowd looked as if they'd toss you into the street for cutting ahead of the line. Siobhan was relieved when she saw Maria's pretty face pop up in the window and gesture to the patio. By the time she reached it, Maria was waiting to usher her in through the back. Tonight, it paid to have dear friends who worked in the pub. "Hurry! Round one will be starting so." They pushed their way through the sea of bodies until they could duck behind the counter. Siobhan loved the long, polished oak bar with its scratches and dents, initials and dates, secrets embedded like fossils in the watermarked swirls. Maria plunked down a pair of wooden crates so they could stand on them and see over the heads to the poker tables. What Maria lacked in height, she made up for with her big personality. She was not one to miss out, and she'd have your head if you dared exclude her. Siobhan scanned the room for MacDara Flannery, not sure if she was looking for her detective sergeant or her lover, feeling foolish when she spotted him in plain clothes. Their eyes locked, and her heart gave a squeeze. That tall man, that messy hair, those blue eyes, and that lopsided grin he flashed like a weapon. She worried once again if any of them had seen her sneaking out of his flat in the early hours of the morning. He was her superior, and romance was forbidden. Yet they persisted. She looked away first, heat crawling up her neck. She hated to admit it, but ever since their romance had become clandestine, it had added an undeniable excitement, a rush that fueled her days with an extra spark. It was hard enough to prove oneself as a female guard, and not a day went by when she didn't berate herself for the risk they were taking. For the first time in her life, she could relate to drug addicts. The inability to stop, the insatiable craving for more. Why didn't he tell her the uniform wasn't required? Her eyes flicked around the room, clocking the other guards. Not a single one had put on his or her uniform. She was like that lone Egypt at a party, who passed over a pretty cocktail dress for a rabbit costume. 3 months as a guard, and Siobhan was still making rookie mistakes. She took off her cap, letting her auburn hair cascade down, and unbuttoned the top few buttons on her starched white shirt. "That a girl?" Maria said, letting out a wolf whistle. Siobhan laughed, and was trying to think of a retort, when her thoughts were interrupted by Rory Mack, who was hurricaning his way through the crowds. "Hold the games!" Rory's deep voice carried above the din. He was a former rugby player, and still looked every bit of it. Well into his 60s, he'd maintained his bulk and swagger. His face sported the ruddy complexion of a man who drank as many pints as he served. Siobhan stole a glance at Declan O'Rourke, whose pale face showed no such tinge of red. He'd managed to serve his product instead of guzzling it, and for a second she felt a strange flush of pride. "I propose we move the poker games to Sharky's." Rory was the owner of the Roundy pub just outside the town walls. A big fan of Sinatra's version of Mac the Knife, and given his surname was Mac, he in turn named his pub Sharky's. Others teased the name was meant to draw predators to his pub, with all the blood in the water from lads drinking and fighting. It was that kind of pub, and given that it was housed in an old stone building that Siobhan adored, and they always had a good turf fire going, she wished it was more of a respectable establishment. It certainly used to be when Mikey Finnegan owned it. But 3 years ago, Mikey retired to the hills of Donegal, and Rory Mack swooped up the Old Stone pub, changing its name and reputation forever. "We've been through this," MacDara said. "We're not debating it again, Rory." Rory pivoted to Declan, extending a meaty hand. "Sharky's is far enough away from the festival that if the crowd gets unruly, we're better equipped to handle it." His hand flexed as if his fists were the equipment he had in mind. MacDara didn't flinch. "It's not going to get unruly." "You're a fool if you think that." "That's Garda fool to you," someone called out. MacDara had to shout to speak over the laughter. "Not another word, Rory. You'll get plenty of lads in for a pint when the night rolls on." "You're going to regret it." Rory shook his head and threaded his way out of the pub, the door slamming behind him. From the small stage in the corner, a microphone screeched. There stood a middle-aged man with a protruding belly and shock of white hair. He wore a navy blazer and white shirt. Siobhan recognised his referee uniform from watching poker tournaments on telly. If she judged him on his face alone, she'd be tempted to call him a silver fox. But his body had gone the way of a lazy dog. She stepped forward and pointed to the 3 round tables with 10 chairs each. "Let the games begin." Whoops and hollers rained down as pint glasses were hoisted up. "Ranked 3rd place. First out the gate is Shane Ross. Or, as some like to call him, the Shane of Spades. Known for his ability to bluff. Keep your eye on that one. A dark horse, but my money's on him." Applause rang out as a slouched man in his 20s, with floppy brown hair, raised his hand, acknowledging the crowds as he ambled to his seat. His face was stripped of all emotion as if he'd drained them at the door. A bluffer. Siobhan felt excitement bubbling in her. What would it feel like to be a card shark? Would she be a bluffer? Who was she kidding? Her face turned scarlet at every turn. Would that be an asset or a tell? She wanted to believe it would be an asset, but she knew it would be a tell. Ranked number 2, hailing from London, England, Miss Queen of Hearts, the lovely Clementine Hart. A stunning black woman, garbed in a bold red dress with a plunging neckline, lipstick to match, and knee-high black boots, strolled out, waving to the crowd. This was not a woman wishing to blend in with the men. And Siobhan started the applause. Clementine took her time pulling out her seat, then lowered herself into it as if she knew all eyes were on her, before crossing her legs and folding her hands delicately on top of her knee. Siobhan had an instant girl crush and couldn't take her eyes off her. "Imagine the life she has," Maria said, her voice a mixture of awe and jealousy. Siobhan was doing just that. Fancy restaurants, piles of bags from Marks and Spencer, a lovely flat with a view of Big Ben, and a sporty little car dragging a string of admirers from her hubcaps. And now, the moment you've been waiting for. The number 1 ranked player in all Ireland. The lad needs no introduction. Out of Dublin. Please welcome Eamon Foley. His nickname went unsaid, but Siobhan could feel it bouncing around the room as Eamon Foley strode out. The octopus. Handsome was an understatement. He had that thing they called star power. Tall, with wavy dark hair and a vicious smile,